The Book of Rebekah by Maxwell Sachs. Chapter 1. The Scroll of Milka. Patel, wake up. Rebekah gently shook the small, tired young woman awake. The sun will be here any moment. Patel sat up and groaned. Milk stained the front of her dress, but thankfully her baby had not yet begun to cry. You lit the fire? She asked groggily. Yes, Rebekah grinned, with a flash of white teeth against her dark brown lips, as you can see from the flames. Her bed companion couldn't help but laugh as she reached for her baby, and when the shrill little creature opened its mouth to protest, she stopped its mouth with her swollen nipple. Instantly, the baby began to suckle and grunt in pleasure. If only everyone was so easy to please, Rebekah said, placing a treasured metal pot close to the flames so that their breakfast would be warm. The cave was not so cold, but a princess and her mother would have a fire if they wanted, and no man would tell them otherwise. Must you go back today? Patel teased, stretching out her short, sturdy legs to warm her feet by the fire. Rebekah, usually so quick to laugh and smile, frowned. She did not want to leave her place amongst her father's herders and return to the palace to be locked in for the Sabbath. I'd rather stay with you, Patel, Rebekah said, staring into the flames and listlessly stirring the lentils. At least Devora, her nurse, would be there to make her welcome, she thought. Devora would caress her and pour hot oil on her hair as she eased the tangles from her curls. I'd rather live in the palace and eat figs and drink wine and sleep in a real bed, Patel said. What, and give up your baby to a nurse? Have them lock you in at night? Wear a veil that covers every inch, even your eyes? No, Patel. Better to stay in your cave and freeze for your freedom, Rebekah said, as they ate together from the same pot, enjoying the pale early morning light that entered through the cave's opening. I wasn't cold last night, Patel said, and Rebekah felt warmer just remembering the way they had shared their body heat, lying knitted together on the cave floor. Eat your breakfast before it gets cold, Rebekah said, trying not to laugh, and tomorrow, or perhaps the next day, I'll return with figs for you. Patel smiled and ran her hand over Rebekah's wild curls. And some honey for the baby? And some honey for the baby, Rebekah agreed. As if on cue, the month-old child spat her mother's nipple from her mouth and screamed. You see, she knows what she wants, Patel laughed. Yes, little one, I will bring your honey, Rebekah said, pressing the baby's cheeks with her large, calloused fingers. The sun was just breaking free of the hills when Rebekah finally stepped out of the cave where she so often spent the night. She was wearing a supple goatskin tunic that bared her muscled arms to the shoulder and her long, lean legs just above the knee. She carried a small pouch at her waist and a long, thick walking staff. Aviel, Patel's husband, was there in the valley, and he had already separated her goats from the flocks he managed for her father. Good morning, Rebekah boomed cheerfully as she descended the steep hillside to meet him. Good morning, sister, he replied with a bow. Would you like an escort back into town? Rebekah laughed. He asked her the same thing every time, and her answer was always the same. No, Aviel, I have legs, hands, eyes, and a knife of my own. I am a hunter, just like you. What need have I of an escort? Aviel smiled benignly and said nothing. He was a quiet man, with few words, but he was kind, an excellent shepherd, and an expert hunter. Aviel had taught her everything she knew about hunting and caring for animals. These untouchable servants had welcomed her gladly into their community and never treated her like a princess. They allowed her to run with them on the hunt and were happy to benefit from her speed and strength in pursuit of meat. In return, she brought them small, worthless items from home that they held in great esteem. An apple, a cup, a long piece of rope. They revered her, and she revered their way of life, out on the mountain, day and night, under the sun, under the stars, roaming free. She wanted nothing more for her life than to disappear into the mountains with her goats, never to be seen again. I will return soon, Rebekah said, whistling for her herd. And if I find you have been beating your wife, Aviel, she made a fist and flexed her biceps at him. Aviel's weathered, tanned face cracked into a wide, lopsided smile. "But if I do not beat her, my sister, she will grow to be just like you." "God forbid," Rebekah replied, her deep laugh rolling and echoing off the hills, and prepared to depart. "Sister," Aviel said, suddenly shy, "will you speak with your father on our behalf, as we discussed?" Rebekah nodded. "As the deer is fast, and the goat is nimble, as the poor man stores his gold in a thimble," Aviel replied, finishing the oath and staring embarrassedly at his feet. Rebekah placed her hand on his shoulder and stepped closer to him. "There should be no shame between us, my brother. When my father, Bethuel, hears that you have not been paid, I know he will make things right," she said. "But last time we went to town to try and speak with the chamberlain, the field workers threw stones at us. What have we done to deserve such treatment?" Aviel asked. "Do not fear. I will speak with my father today," Rebekah said, repeating her promise, even though she had no idea how she would fulfill it. The city of Haran was still sleeping when she slipped inside the high walls of her family's palatial compound. A servant had laid out fresh hay in her stable, and the goats jostled and fought each other to be the first inside. Rebekah was in no such rush to enter her own house. She had that sinking feeling and dreaded the walls closing in on her the moment the key clicked in the lock. She must seek an audience with her father, but how? Her mother controlled every door, every passageway, with keys hung from a silver chain around her waist. She would have to beg her mother for permission to speak to her own father. It enraged her, but how else would she speak with him about the plight of the herders? Desperate to delay her entry, she looked up one last time at the sky, already boxed in by the hard lines of the roof, and made her decision. Hopping lightly up onto a water barrel, she hooked her armpits over the rim of the roof and hauled herself up. Breathless and exhilarated, she lay there, concealed by the slope of the roof, and looked down into the courtyard. It was a view she'd never seen before. Eventually, two servants crossed the yard, and Rebekah got a thrill from catching snippets of their conversation and seeing without being seen. What else might she see, she wondered. As the sun inched higher in the sky, Rebekah climbed the mismatched roofs of her family home until she came to a stop, above the room from which she had been barred entrance these last 6 months or more, her father's sick room. She had not intended to come here, but now she was. It seemed inevitable. Her father, Bethuel, was the glue that held the world together, and he was very ill. Some people said he wouldn't last until the spring. Some people even whispered that he was already dead. Rebekah shuddered even to contemplate it, because not only did she love her father dearly, he was the only thing standing between her and a life of abject misery in the suffocating prison that was the woman's quarters. If her father died, who would keep her from being locked away like any other woman? It was a question that haunted her subconscious mind for years, and one that fought its way into her conscious thoughts with increasing frequency. If she could just see him and ask him what her future would hold, what future he had planned for her, he would explain things and make the world safe again. Unconsciously, her fingers worked their way under the nearest roof tile, prizing it from its place and placing it silently to the side. Careful not to slip or make a noise, Rebekah placed her ear to the woven reeds that comprised the inside of the roof and listened to the terrifying sound of her father crying out in his agonies. "Wife!" Bethuel cried piteously. "Yes, husband." It was her mother's voice, and it made the hairs on Rebekah's arms stand up. She scratched a tiny hole in the weave of the reeds and pressed her eye to it. She was looking down at her father, writhing on his bed, almost frantic with the urgency of his pain. "Turn them away. I can't do it. I can't do it," he said, sounding more like a child than a man. He leaned forward, tensing over his swollen belly, and Rebekah saw that the back of his shirt was soaked with sweat. Pressing her nose against the little hole in the roof, she inhaled deeply and then recoiled. Anyone who had been successful on the hunt would know the smell of death. But there was another smell too, something sweeter. Here, take a little puff, just a little puff. Rebekah put her eye back to the opening and saw her mother holding a pipe to her father's lips, followed by the sound of him sucking greedily. She knew that only a man who embraced the nearness of death would allow himself to fall victim to opium, and the knowledge weighed heavy on her soul. Not too much, my love, her mother said, gently plucking the pipe from his fingers and placing it on the bedside table where he could not reach it. Her father's eyes followed the pipe greedily as he begged, "No, wife, please, please." Unable to even lift his hands from the bed to plead for his pipe, he was useless. "You must be clear-headed, my love," her distraught mother told him gently. "You cannot give them any reason to suspect that your judgment has been clouded." Her father slumped back against his sweat-soaked pillows and wailed in self-pity. So heart-wrenching and desperate a scene she had not expected to find, and for a moment Rebekah had to look away. She closed her eyes and rested her forehead on the cold tiles, letting the painful truth sink into her heart. Her father really was dying, and the future was waiting like a trap to catch her. She returned to her spy hole just in time to watch the family elders, her uncles, Chesed and Jidlaf, waddling and shuffling into the room. "Brother," Chesed said warmly, leaning over to kiss Bethul on each of his sallow cheeks. "Thank you for coming. I'm sorry to call you here, but..." Bethul gestured to his swollen belly and the stick-thin legs that stuck out from beneath it. "It's been too long since we last visited, and for that the apology should be ours," Jidlaf said, struggling to catch his breath and collapsing heavily into the chair at Bethul's bedside. Her mother retreated to the corner of the room, squatting down behind a low table and pulling her shawl up over her already veiled face. The men did not greet her or pay her any attention at all. They were waiting for Bethul to speak. The seconds dragged on awkwardly, but her father seemed confused about what he should say or where he should start. "Since you invited us here on official business, perhaps you'd better start by telling us what it is," Chesed prompted, holding up an ancient rolled parchment and adding, "and why you wanted me to bring this." "It's about the estate," Bethul said, closing his eyes and taking a long, deep breath. "I think the time has come to bestow my blessing." From her rooftop position, Rebekah trembled. The blessing meant only one thing. Her father was preparing to die. Anxiously, she pressed her pale green eye to the hole once more. "The blessing is yours to bestow, as is the prerogative of all men, sound of mind and conscience," Chesed said, intoning the old wisdom. "But what is this for, Bethul? Surely you know who your own children are?" he asked, holding up the scroll once more. "Can you read it?" Bethul replied, closing his eyes and groaning. "More or less," Chesed said. "The names are easy enough." "Then look them up," Bethul said through gritted teeth. Chesed sighed dramatically and pointed at an oil lamp that Jidlaf dutifully held aloft so that he could read. He didn't open the whole parchment at once, but rather a little at a time, creating a second roll with his left hand and rotating the parchment as he read, line by line, to preserve and protect the curve of the sheet. "Ah, here it is. RVKH. He read the vowelless letters aloud. "Rebekah. But there's been a mistake. The priest must have slipped when he applied his seal, because what does it say?" Bethul practically shouted, startling his brothers and making Rebekah gasp. She bit down hard on her tongue to keep herself silent. "But this can't be right," Chesed said, sounding confused. "Bethul, did you know about this mistake?" "Read it," Bethul demanded. "Read it out loud. What does it say?" Rebekah knew very well the power of reading and the power given to ideas when they were spoken aloud. She held her breath and strained her eyes to try and see the markings on the page. She'd heard of the scroll of Milka, but she'd never seen it until now. "What does it say?" Jidlaf asked, peering uselessly at the lines and squiggles. Chesed hesitated, and Bethul heaved his body up with great effort, leaning forward and looking Chesed directly in the eye. "Read it," he insisted, spittle flying from his lips. It says that Rebekah was born and the sacrifice was given for the healthy delivery of a baby girl, Chesed said, pursing his lips as if to stop any more words from coming out. And, Bethuel insisted, as great rivers of foul-smelling sweat dripped from his face. It also says that Rebekah is a boy, that the priest recorded here the healthy delivery of a male child for whom the due sacrifice was given. Bethuel collapsed back onto his pillows, no longer able to support his weight on his arms. It's the truth, he slurred. Although she was completely alone on the roof of her father's room, Rebekah had the distinct feeling that she was being watched. Shame crawled all over her skin. How could they say such a thing about her? And more importantly, could it be true? Was this the reason why she was so different? She needed to know the meaning of this strange thing. Reluctantly, she turned her attention back to the conversation flowing below her. Chesed stuttered. It must be a mistake. The priest. Milka was old. She probably didn't even notice. Rebekah is a Tumtum, Bethuel told them, struggling for breath as his face turned a deep purple. And I want to know that you'll see my blessing is respected when I name Rebekah as my heir. The roof, no, the whole world seemed to move under her, and Rebekah gripped the tiles so tightly that little shards of terracotta worked their way under her fingernails. She'd never heard the word Tumtum. She breathed slowly, trying to focus her attention and hear what was being said over the pounding of her heart in her ears. But brother, it is not our custom to bless our daughters before our sons. You must know that, Chesed protested, looking to Jidlaf for support, but Jidlaf just stared back at him, wide-eyed. You said yourself, Rebekah is a boy, Bethuel argued stubbornly. I said no such thing, Chesed shouted. Jidlaf placed a clammy, restraining hand on his older brother's arm, leaned forward, and said gently, Brother, is it your wish to name Rebekah as your heir today, with us as your witnesses? No, 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 Rebekah pleaded silently. Bethuel shook his head, exhaled noisily, and let all the fight leave his sweat-soaked body. Not yet, he said. Does that mean you are undecided about this important matter? Chesed asked him, hopefully. I still have time, he replied shakily, but I want to know. Is it possible? Will you support my decision? The Tumtum is one of God's great mysteries, Chesed replied, leaning back and assuming the expression of a great and wise sage. Rebekah listened carefully. She knew Chesed was the most educated of all Milka's sons and well known for his pragmatic legal rulings in family and community affairs. Is it possible? He mused. Certainly, you have the right to give the blessing to whomever you choose. And you are correct. It does say Rebekah is also a boy. But what is the value of a faded seal on a crumbling parchment in the face of what everyone knows to be true? Rebekah is your daughter, our niece. She's a sister and an aunt. She's a woman. That's how we know her. But she's also a boy, Bethuel insisted. Chesed sighed. The second question comes down to a single point. What is her true nature? He countered, running his soft hands down the length of his long grey beard. If she is female, to give her the blessing would be an abomination in the eyes of God. Not to mention that she would marry a man one day, and the family name and your estate would pass to strangers. It would be a tragic blow to our whole family, and to your wife, Bethuel. Who would care for your wife? God forbid your wife should pass into the hands of a stranger, Jidlaf said, shaking his head. Her mother remained silent and unmoving in the corner. Pressing on before he lost the string of his thoughts, Chesed continued. If, however, Rebekah's true nature is actually that of a man, it still remains to be seen if he would really be the better choice. A Tumtum cannot father children. After his death, The blessing and the estate would inevitably pass to Laban anyway. Laban is my second child, Bethuel said, his face scrunched up in a mask of disappointment. Are you so set against naming Laban? He is your son, after all, and you've raised him with the expectation of being your heir, Chesed reminded him. I've always loved Rebekah above all others. From the moment she was born, I've been bound up to her, Bethuel answered, his voice thick with pain and emotion. Brother, that is the feeling all righteous men have for their daughters, but do not confuse that with the importance of having a son, Chesed said. Bethuel sighed. Just like my beloved Rebekah, my mind is in too. Jidlaf leaned forward again, the chair groaning under his weight. Could you really do it? Would it even be fair to do it? To publicly name the child you raised as a daughter as your rightful son and heir? Because once it's done, it cannot be undone. If I'm completely honest, Bethuel said sadly, I don't know. I fear to mention what happened with Abraham. With that in mind, Chesed said, hastily interrupting him, I should tell you that while you still live and are sound of mind, the blessing is yours and yours only to bestow. However, if you died without naming your heir, then the decision would fall to me and to Jidlaf. Should that happen, there is no doubt in my mind that we would name Laban. Bethuel closed his eyes for a moment and blinked back tears. Thank you, brother, for your honesty and for your wise counsel, Bethuel said, his voice suddenly so quiet Rebekah could barely hear it. Chesed stood up then and said it was time they left Bethuel to get some rest and think over everything they had said. But when they reached the door, he turned back and said, I hope it will not be too soon for you, Bethuel. God will surely grant me enough time to make the right decision, Bethuel replied, as his fists began to compulsively clench the bedsheets. Then make it well, Jidlaf said, passing out of Rebekah's field of view. She heard the soft thud of the door closing behind them. In a state of shock, Rebekah rolled over onto her back and watched grey clouds move over the vast expanse of the sky. What was this strange Tumtum thing? Though she'd always behaved more like a boy, she'd always thought herself to be a girl. Did she not squat to pass water like any other woman? Her head was spinning faster and faster, shuffling memories from her childhood that seemed so innocent until now. Tumtum. She tried to say it, but her lips refused to make the sounds. The word felt too foreign, too raw, too dangerous. She pushed it away. The men would soon realize that this business with the scroll of Milka was a big misunderstanding. She was not interested in the blessing for herself. That was a much more complicated thing than what she wanted for her life. If they tried to give me the blessing, I'll simply refuse to accept it, she thought, smiling and breathing more easily now. She pressed her eye back to the crack in the reeds and observed her mother removing a cup from her father's mouth. Saliva ran down his chin, and her mother wiped it with a cloth before pulling the bedsheets over his chest and tucking him in tightly. In a soft, gentle voice, her mother whispered, Our brother is correct, dear husband. It is you who will bestow the blessing, but he's wrong about one thing. It's me who will decide who gets it. I will go now and inform our son that he will soon be taking up the role I raised him for. And as for the other one, that abomination you call daughter, I will decide about her too. Rest now, sweet prince. Her father did not move or show any sign that he heard or understood, and it seemed particularly cruel to Rebekah that her mother should talk to him as if he were a child, and not the great man she knew him to be. So, when her mother left the room, locking the door behind her as she went, Rebekah followed.